Hello and welcome back to Toys Thursday with Johnny Tiger on September 16, 2021. Last week I mentioned that we probably was doing the last episode of our fantasy relevant series, and it wasn't until today that I was fully intended to move on to other stuff that I realized that there were a few honorable mentions that got left out, and uh, they really shouldn't be left out. So we are going to probably spend a couple more episodes just to uh, get some of these really worthwhile mentions in there. You see, I realized that in the early stage of talking about fantasy related action figures, we talked about Greek gods and goddesses, Greek heroes, Greek mythology, and it would be a little bit one-sided or unfair to just talk about the Greek and Roman mythology and neglecting other cultures that when I can easily cover them. This is why in front of the camera we have this carving of an Egyptian scarab beetle. We are going to talk about uh, the Egyptian mythology, pantheon, and fantasy today. But it's not going to be all that vast because my collection is a little bit limited when it comes to Egyptian themed action figures. Now, I do have a couple of the mummies, but I am reserving those for Halloween. But today we will be looking at a very important figure in the Egyptian pantheon, and also one action figure that I spent many years looking for, and turned out to be a little bit of a disappointment. So yeah, stay with me, and we'll get this on the road. This Scarabito was given to me by an old friend way back in year 2000. Uh, Now, scarab beetles always kind of scare me, and ever since I watched the Mummy and Mummy Return movie, and you saw hordes of these creepy, crawly bugs thing that would burrow under people's skin and eat them from the inside, that's just like really scary kind of thoughts. Just imagining that, especially for someone like me who was always a little bit squeamish around creepy crawlies in the first place. Uh, but maybe because I feared them so much, I had nightmares about them. So the first time I saw this little stone carving of an Egyptian scarab, I wanted it. It's kind of strange. Sometimes we just want things that scare us. Uh, it's almost like having them on the shelf. It navigate, minimize that fear a little bit. Growing up, I didn't know a heck of a lot about Egyptian mythology and Egyptian gods and goddesses and all that what was going on there. I knew a little bit about the mummy. I was really scared of the concept of the mummy, but other than the mummy, I really didn't know much until I became a teenager and started reading up more, uh, tracing back from Greek mythology, Roman mythology, back to the root. I mean, when we really want to go back, most of today's religion, most of today's concept and uh, mythologies and pantheons originated from old Egyptian concepts and beliefs. So when I was a teenager and started reading mythology, I was very interested in backtracing and see what was things like. What did people from that long ago believe in? What did they fantasize about? And who were their heroes and who were their villains? Now, when it came to Egyptian mythology and Greek gods and goddesses, uh, there's a lot of commonality. And one of the commonality is the subject of today's video. You see, in both Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology, there's one very important character, one very important deity that always has been gravely misunderstood and portrayed in a really bad light. That deity is Hades in Greek mythology and Anubis in Egyptian mythology. These two gods, they were both protector and rulers of the underworld. And because of our intrinsic need to simplify things when it's presented to the general public, people think underworld means death, and death means bad. So a lot of time when we see Anubis, this jackal-headed god, and we see Hades, this Greek god of the death, we see them portrayed in movies and cartoons and comic books. They're portrayed as evil. They're like Satan. They're like Lucifer. The truth is a lot more complicated. Hades and Anubis, they were not evil. If anything, they were more on the side of good. They were the guys that were put in charge to take care of the souls that end up in the underworld. So most people that died end up in the underworld, people that didn't qualify to go into heaven. So someone have to take care of these people. Someone have to punish the wicked soul, take care of the kind, gentle soul, and make sure that the demonic souls don't escape into the mortal world. And these people were Anubis and Hades. So if uh, if anything, they are more like protectors and defenders, taking care of us when we die, than this evil, scheming, plotting, uh, deceiving forces of evil that they have been portrayed to be. And with that said, we are going to look at one portrayal of Anubis, the Egyptian jackal god, the god of the underworld, protector of the dead, and embalming today. If I didn't tell you, you would probably not know that this action figure was supposed to be a version of Anubis. This is because this is not your conventional classic portrayal of Anubis. This action figure came straight from the imagination of Todd McFarlane, one of the best, most well received toy makers in the 90s, one of the most successful comic book artist in the 90s. Todd McFarlane in early 2000s decided to visit the Egyptian culture with his Spawn action figures. So in Spawn Series 33, he imagined Spawn happening in the old Egyptian world where the ruler Osiris got murdered and came back as a hellspawn, and the person, the deity, made it possible for him to return to the living was the uh, deity Anubis. In this series, it's actually called the Jackal King, even though from this angle it looked more like a hawk or a bird of prey rather than a jackal. A few little notes of interest. Jackal King has brown skin, while Anubis is usually portrayed with black skin. The black skin was not meant to represent the color of jackals. The black skin was to mimic the color of decaying dead flesh and the black soil of the Nile River. Also, another little trivia, jackals have now been proven to share the genetic traits of gray wolves. So scientifically, they are no longer called jackals. Scientifically, jackals have been renamed to be Egyptian wolves instead. The Jackal King, aka Anubis, made by Todd McFarlane in the early 2000s, is cutting quite an impressive figure here. He is in a deep forward lunge with his weapons in his hand. He has giant blue wings on his back, and his head is covered with a very ornate looking bird shaped helmet. Most of his body is nude, displaying a lot of very powerful looking sinewy muscles. Uh, Around his waist and his feet, there are bandages protecting his skin and modesty. Behind his back, behind his waist, you can see a trailing blue skirt of some kind with a flowing sash. There are gold trim on his skirt piece, and there is a pair of cobras poking out on the side of his waistband. Now, I'm not quite sure. Are these supposed to be ornamental cobras, or are they like real cobras coming out of his body, or what the heck is going on there? But there's a lot of intricate details on this action figure to be sure. He also have hieroglyphs tattooed and etched into his skin, and on his knees, the knee pads, one depicting Egyptian ink and the other another Egyptian symbol. He has a pair of wicked hooked blades strapped to his feet, so don't get kicked by this guy, it would hurt a lot. And he had knives strapped around his sides. Unfortunately, the knives are not removable. Uh, Otherwise, that would be pretty cool. But yeah, they are there. So he is armed to the teeth and ready for battle. The bird helmet can be removed, showing you a much more classical canine jackal face underneath. Unfortunately, maybe because of the restriction of the design, because you need to be able to fit the helmet over his head, he is missing his big pointy ears. So that is one of the things that is a little bit disappointing about this action figure. Honestly, without the ear, the jackal head just looks a little bit silly and really small and kind of sad. For weapons, Anubis comes with a pair of hooked swords that honestly look a little bit like the kind of hooked sword you see in Chinese kung fu movies. So I am not sure if that is at all authentic or accurate to Egyptian portrayal. The pommel of the sword can be detached, allowing you to slip the sword hilt into his hand easily. Although the two swords look very identical, they are in fact different mode, so that is pretty cool. You do get two different blades, and you can display him holding the blades up or the blades down. Now, I don't know if you guys can tell on the camera, but for something that's supposed to be quote unquote toy, uh, these little swords in his hands are really sharp, really pointy. So this is definitely not something that you want a child to be playing with. Although I must say, if you get your hand on a figure like Jackal King or AKA Anubis, and you give him to a child to play with, there's really something wrong with you in the first place because honestly, this is a collector's item. This is not meant to be, it's not meant for the hands of a child. A child would break him within under 3 minutes. In addition to the swords and the wings and the helmet, Anubis comes with a little stone block for him to rest his front foot on, so it will help him balance on the shelf. It is not ideal, but it is better than nothing because without it, you would have a really hard time getting him posed. And this brings us to one of the reasons why this is such a disappointing figure. I spent at least 6 years looking for this action figure. After reading reviews upon reviews of how great he is, how good he looks, how big he is, how muscular he is, and how awesome a design he is. And then when I finally got my hand on him, he can barely move. What you see is what you get. Okay, this guy is stuck in this pose. There's nothing you can do with it. You can maybe change the angle of his arm a little bit, so he has sword up, sword down, but his arms forever trapped out to the side. His wings are always extended behind him, and his legs are always in this lunge position. Honestly, this is just a statue. This is more a statue. This is not an action figure that you can do anything with. Now, if that's the only thing that's wrong with him, I would be okay because I knew he was made by McFarlane. And just in case you don't know, back in the 90s and early 2000s, if something was made by McFarlane, it meant it wasn't going to move. It wasn't an action figure. It didn't have a lot of joints. So if that's the only thing wrong with him, I would have been okay. But I was uh, expecting a much bigger action figure because of all the reviews saying, oh, how he's really muscular and how he's massive and yada yada yada. But honestly, if you take the wing and you wonder why the mommy was deadly scared of a cat, got nothing to do with being the guardian of the underworld or any of that nonsense. Cats are just really destructive. I mean, look at this. I just finished talking about his sword like 1 minute ago, and then now Aslan jumped onto the counter and totally knocked Anubis off the counter, and now one of those aforementioned hilt of his sword is broken. You know how long I've been looking for this figure, and how much I had to pay to get it? So yeah, not cool, not cool. Uh, but sometimes I just think it's kind of annoying because many times I end up having action figure broken during these videos because of a cat or some kind of accident or things fall over. Ay, oh well, anything for the sake of the show. Anyway, continuing. Uh, Without his wings, Anubis is really not that big. He's about the size of any regular Todd McFarlane action figure. He is very muscular, and so there is that. But uh, with him being so preposed and static, and him being just a regular sized figure, and him not being a very accurate portrayal of what Anubis is supposed to look like. And on top of that, his jackal head missing the jackal style ears. All this just adds up to a little bit of a disappointing feeling after having heard so much about this action figure. And because he is a bit of a vintage action figure, he's got a bit of a vintage status. He is getting harder and harder to track down. Sometimes he's selling for hundreds of dollars on eBay, and let me tell you, hundreds of dollars to buy this action figure is not worth it. Now, with that said, we must be fair and say that my expectation might have been blown out of proportion based on how long I've searched for this figure and how much I've read about him. So I probably built him up to be a lot better than can be reasonably expected in my head. When it's all said and done, I am glad to have at least this portrayal, this depiction of a very important Egyptian deity on my display. He is a very good-looking action figure, and he stands in uh, very well with my display of gods and goddesses, and definitely cuts a rather unique profile with his giant wings and muscular build. Next week, we'll come back and we'll look at another deity from another culture to round off our fantasy series. For now, have a good day. I think I'm going to go cook a cat for dinner.